the whole use of AI came from some of the team who felt that, we have so much more to deliver, and AI can be the tool that help us put more added value into it, but reduce some of the unnecessary work. So I think that was one of the drivers. And on the other hand, it's also for talents in the company who wants to develop. I think they all see that if I'm not in a company who provides this opportunity, then I might look elsewhere. So I think it's also they see that we invest in it, and they see the benefit of that. So it's also a bit linked to employee development, if you will.
I'm Eric Fulweiler, and this is Scratch, bringing you marketing lessons from the leading brands and brains, rewriting the rulebook from scratch for the world of today.
Hey everyone, my guest today is Åsa Borg. She is the Chief Marketing Officer of Polestar since 2020 and has been instrumental in establishing Polestar's brand image and elevating Polestar from an electric vehicle manufacturer to the embodiment of Scandinavian automotive luxury. She's done a bunch of impressive things since she has been there, including setting up an in-house creative team. We talk a lot about that, not just what it looks like now and how it operates, but how she decided to in-house the team, which I think is going to be really relevant for a lot of people. Åsa spent 20 years at Volvo before joining Polestar, and she talks about kind of the difference of coming from an incumbent to essentially launching a new car brand from scratch, which is really interesting as well. And then to round out the conversation, everybody's favorite topic, we talk about the practical use cases of AI within her team right now, and a really interesting conversation about how she got there and the importance of following, listening to, and providing opportunities for talent within the realm of AI within your organization. I think you're going to really enjoy this one. Fascinating conversation from a very exciting brand in a fast-changing and very disruptive category right now. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Åsa of Polestar. Hello, Åsa. Thank you so much for joining me. How are things going up north in Sweden?
Thank you for having me. All good here. We see some more sunlight coming every day now, so that's good.
It's funny, I actually just got back from the Southern Hemisphere. We have an office in Cape Town, so I was down there for a week, it's pretty nice to get a week of summertime in February. But I have to say, I love your part of the world. My mom's side of my family is actually Scandinavian from Sweden back in the day, so I always feel at home when I'm up there. And it's a part of the world that I think disproportionately has created some amazing brands. Obviously, we're going to talk about Polestar. You were at Volvo for a really long time, which of course makes the list. So I think this might be the first guest we've had from Scandinavia. I'm going to have to double check that with Viren afterwards, but really excited to get into it. Before we talk about Polestar, your background and the roadmap that you have for this brand and business, can you please tell us about a challenger brand that you're particularly passionate about right now and why?
When it comes to other brands, I think we look for a lot of inspiration outside the automotive industry for inspiration. But obviously, since I'm in the industry and also especially within the EV part, we look very closely, of course, to some of our competitor challenger brands that are now out there and how they actually take a very different approach of taking on the market. Some go very broad and some go much more niche. So that is what I follow really close these days.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in that world. We, obviously Tesla, of course, but we actually, I mentioned I was in South Africa. We did one of our CMO roundtables and we had the African CMO for Volkswagen essentially at the table. And what's interesting about South Africa is they've had such an influx, and I guess it's the case in Europe as well, of Chinese EVs, BYD, Haval. And so it was really interesting to get her perspective on it because there is, let's say, a lot of change and disruption happening in your industry right now. But of course, you are one of those disruptors. So let's talk about Polestar. For people who might not know, can you give us an overview of what Polestar is and kind of, I guess, the state of the union of the brand and business right now?
Yeah, so we're started in 2017 from the Volvo business. And we really set out to challenge the car industry and, go for the future of performance driving and go for electric cars. So we had our first cars arriving in 2020 and the Polestar 2. And then we have now Polestar 3 and Polestar 4 out there. So an SUV full size with the Polestar 3 and the more coupe-like SUV with the Polestar 4. And we just announced that we also have the Polestar 5 coming our way. And we have our headquarters here in Gothenburg, Sweden. That's also where we have design center. We have R&D also here, also in UK. And we have factories in China, in North America, US, soon in Korea. And we just announced that we will also have manufacturing in Europe. So we're a global player and really offering the performance cars of tomorrow. That's what we set out to do.
And actually, I think, I reached out to you a little while ago to see if you could come on the podcast. And that was because on my street here in London, it's probably 2-3 years ago, I noticed a Polestar. Somebody bought a Polestar, one of my neighbors. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting looking car. I had heard of it before, but I hadn't really seen one in the wild. And that led to me reaching out. So great to have you here today. So before we go deeper into the Polestar brand and the marketing playbook that you have built and that you're executing now, let's go back a little bit to, you spent 20 years at Volvo in various roles. And one of the things that we talked about in the prep call that I thought was really interesting was the difference in coming from Volvo, where Volvo is, of course, a very established brand globally. And you had to essentially launch a car brand from scratch. And it was a totally different challenge. There was no awareness, no equity, no loyalty. And I think a lot of people listening, if they're in startups, if they're in challenger brands, might be in the same specific boat. But actually, I think for people who aren't, for people who work in the Volvos, the established brands of the world, it's always helpful and interesting to think about, and it's why this podcast is named what it is, what you would do differently if you needed to start from scratch for today. So I'd love to hear what was the different approach that you needed to take to launch Polestar from scratch versus the existing brand and how you approach marketing at Volvo.
Yeah, and it's such a respect for everyone who's doing the journey of startups. I mean, coming from Volvo again with the 100% awareness, known in all countries of the world. I mean, even known for about the cars and the safety and all of that. And then coming into Polestar, and I have to say that I was not among the first people on board. I joined a few years in, so a lot of work had been done to establish the brand. So well done to all teams within Polestar, because it's not the marketing team or the brand team who builds it. It's of course the full company. But again, coming from an industry where you have it all in place, like decades or almost 100 years, it's a huge challenge then to start to build the awareness from zero, start markets from scratch, recruiting from scratch, and also with the different model we have to sell online and direct, which is of course very different to traditional automotive wholesale business. So it's a mix of an e-commerce, putting all of that in place, and also then building the brand and awareness. So a fantastic journey and a lot of learnings. But what we really did differently was to the whole how we do marketing. I think the good thing is that you have a transparency through the funnel, what you actually do. You see quick effects, and you can follow with all the data through the funnel, how you build the awareness, how you drive the leads, and in the end conversion. So that in itself is tough and also rewarding when it works, right? So that's good.
And, obviously the EV category is very crowded. There's a lot going on. You mentioned some of the challenges that you stepped into with COVID, the semiconductor shortage, tax incentives ending, et cetera. But sustainability is obviously a key piece of the conversation and the category. And granted, that has, from my perspective, changed a lot over the last 5 years from when you started. But one of the things that you mentioned in our prep call, which, by the way, we've heard from other, not necessarily purpose-led brands, but brands in other categories where environmental, corporate, social responsibility has a role to play in the product they build, not just the marketing they want to do. But one of the things you mentioned is that sustainability is important, but maybe it doesn't sell as effectively or on its own. I'd love for you to elaborate on that and talk a little bit about how you have or haven't leveraged sustainability and how you've thought about building a brand.
I mean, it's so much in our core. I mean, like of our business with sustainability. It's how we design things. It's how we have transparency as one of the core values of the company. We wanted to challenge the industry, and remember a few years back then, after Dieselgate, all of that, a lot of hidden things were coming up. And I think the core thing for us was about transparency. We want the customers to see the footprint that a car actually produces. So we're very transparent of the CO2 footprint on each and every car, but also on the journey and the steps we're now taking for each Polestar 2 model year, if you will, how we reduce it. So the sustainability is so much core, and of course a car buying or a car purchase is rational to some people, but in this category of more premium luxurious product, there is also an emotional aspect. And in the whole luxury industry, I think the sustainability is so much core in that. I don't think you're relevant to customers unless you have that on top of your agenda. And also, since fleet is a big part of the automotive business, I think many companies want their employees to drive EV cars, and I think more and more important, EV cars with a strong sustainability agenda. It's not just enough to have clean end pipes. You need to have a much stronger message and purpose than that. And I think that's where we come in, and that's where we can play very strong, I think. So it's not necessarily the USB that you sell on sustainability, that you put it in your advertising, which is, by the way, very tricky with easily becoming greenwashing. But I think it's the core of our brand with the sustainability. That's sort of our job to make sure that comes across. And that, I think, will sell car in the end, or it will for sure. So it's a tricky balance, but it's core of our business, and it's, I think, how we anyways try to sell cars.
Hey everyone, just another quick interruption. If you're listening to this podcast and you're not already part of our AMP community on WhatsApp, would love for you to get involved. So AMP is a community that we started at the beginning of the business, really, just to kind of bring together some of the interesting people that we were talking to, the marketers that we were coming across, many of whom have been on this show as well. And so now AMP is about 300 senior marketers from around the world, from various categories, different stages, challengers, incumbents. And it's really a place where people can share questions, can share resources, can make new connections, can use folks as sounding boards. And for those that are in it, you know, it is a very vibrant community. It's really taken on a life of its own, which is amazing. So if you're listening to this and you want to get involved, please go to our website, weareRival.com. There you can find the application form or reach out to me or someone at Rival directly. Thanks so much.
Yeah, and what I really like about that, and I'll draw out for people listening, because I think this is the big takeaway from me, is that, again, like we've heard from a lot of people and like we see in the market, you know, environmental responsibility, sustainability maybe doesn't sell on its own and can't necessarily be the leading message. However, if it really is part of who you are, then actually it's much more about shining a light on what's already there rather than trying to create something that you think people might want to hear. So that makes a ton of sense to me. So I think that's probably a good bridge to talk about some of the actual advertising that you've done. So you've done a bunch of campaigns. You did a Super Bowl spot in 2022. You did a campaign called Silent in a Loud World, one that was called No Compromise. There was one that you did recently that your team just sent over around launching a new range of Arctic Circle cars, which looks really cool. I haven't watched the whole documentary on YouTube, but I'm going to. So out of those, would love to maybe touch on one or two that you're most passionate about. And I think, you know, we're going to get into a little bit of like how the sausage is made with the in-house team, which I think is really interesting. I don't know if all of those were the in-house team, but I'd love for you to talk about maybe how you approach them at a high level, and then how, to what you said before of the differences of coming to Polestar and being able to see kind of full funnel and just a different business model than where you came from at Volvo, how you kind of measured impact within an organization that was kind of new to doing marketing.
Yeah, so there's a lot of question in that question, but I think I will try to sort it out. I think when we do the campaigns, and as I mentioned, we have all the data, we can see the results. We also do a lot of creative testing. We do panels, we do AI testing, we also work with some external partners to test. Because of course, marketing is also very subjective. There are a lot of opinions and so forth. We need to have our facts in order to make sure what works, and also that we build the brand that we want to be. I think that's the thing, and one of the reasons why we went from agencies to more in-house is that we want to stay core. It's so important in the beginning that when you establish yourself, that you really stay true to who you are and not dilute, which is easily done when you're quickly expanding. So, but to the campaigns, I think the Super Bowl was, of course, a really good opportunity for us to show who we really are, and to go really show the design. How do you break through in an environment like Super Bowl when you're surrounded with much bigger budgets, celebrities, but everyone is still tuning in to watch the commercials. So I think the Super Bowl, and I can tell you much more about that, is one of the commercials that have rated very high in those tests. Silence in a loud world that you mentioned, I think that we run in a few markets. That's of course very brave to go totally silent. For those of you who haven't seen it, it's on YouTube, and to really break through in again an advertising landscape that is very crowded. But I have so many that I'm really proud of that I think it would be unfair to mention my favorites, but it's again coming back to the testing. I can see which ones are performing the best and where you have the strongest brand values.
And so just to double click on that, and I guess this can be a segue into the larger conversation about the in-house agency and how you got there, but just to zoom in on that piece, the testing specifically. So are you testing concepts? Are you testing micro content? I know you mentioned you have a few different kind of tools and partners that you use for testing, but at what stage of the strategic or the creative process do you start testing versus going with kind of the guidance of you and what you think is going to be right?
Yeah. So I think it's probably quite late in the process still when we are unsure on certain directions. We can test different copy and so forth. And we usually test the full, what we intend to go live with very late. So at this point, we're not testing concepts yet, but maybe that's the next step.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm always interested in kind of the nuts and bolts of how that comes together and how you bring data into the creative process. And then also just the constant balance. It's so interesting. Having done like 120 of these interviews now, there's such a spectrum between CMOs. And there's not one right way to do it, but there's some. I remember the CMO of Gymbox here in the UK was like, not only do I not do any testing or research, if I see data, I don't even I think people don't know what they want, and just completely goes with the gut. I remember the CMO of Resident Home, which is a big like direct to consumer. They're actually one of the fastest growing e-commerce businesses in North America, but based in Israel. CMO of that business, nothing goes forward if it doesn't have the data to prove it. And so I think great marketing, and for most people who aren't necessarily savants one way or the other, it is a combination of both art and science, right? And so I'm just always curious to kind of understand how people balance those two things.
Yeah, but that's also the interesting thing with the AI and the panels with customers, and also looking at true behavior, what people, what kind of actions they take. So I think then you also get a mix of not only personal opinions and but a bit more facts on the table, which is nice.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that's a great bridge into, let's talk about, one of the key things that you've done that has clearly driven a lot of the success that you've been able to generate for the business and brand so far has been building out a very strong in-house team. So before we talk about like what that looks like, you shared a little bit in our prep call of how you got there. You tested external partners, it didn't work, et cetera. Could you just talk a little bit about that journey? Because I think for a lot of the CMOs, senior marketers listening, both things can be hard. Finding the right talent to build in-house, finding the right agency. I remember one CMO that we were talking to about doing a project for, he said finding an agency is like finding a contractor. You never know if somebody's going to be good, and it ends up costing twice as much and takes twice as long. So I think that any advice that you can share on your journey to end up on the in-house agency? Because I think a lot of people might be thinking about it, but maybe aren't sure when or where or how to make that case and choose that direction.
No, and I think when I was at Volvo Cars, I had a really close relationship with one agency, and that worked super. It was like one integrated team, almost like an in-house agency. So I think it really depends on where you are and what situation and company you're in. When I joined here, there was a relationship with an agency, and I think, again, coming back that we're a new brand, and it was easy that you took the brand in another direction, and it's also a very quick moving environment. You need to be really fast in going back and forth. That didn't really work out, and we tested another setup, and we had the same thing again. And we're very much a creative and design driven company, so we had some in-house talents already at the time. So usually we ended up fixing things ourselves, and in the end we just decided that let's try this, and we did it at small scale and actually have built it up since then. So it was a bit of an overlap, but then after a while it feels very natural that we own our own destiny of how we take out the brand and how we sell our cars, and to our model of also having part of the media in-house. So for the programmatic buying, we also do that. So they work super tight together with the automated performance marketing part. So that's a huge benefit that we can drive it from here for 27 markets that we're live in.
Hey everyone, just wanted to take a second to make sure that you knew about another podcast that we have here at Rival that's all about microcultures. Many of you have probably seen our white paper that came out recently about how challenger brands are tapping into and leveraging microcultures to drive differentiated category growth. Our Chief Strategy Officer, Lance, and our Principal of Strategy, Cecilia, host a fantastic podcast called Ripples, where they explore this whole world of microcultures, including speaking to guests from some of the brands that are doing it well. So you should definitely check it out. There's going to be a link in the show notes. You can find it on wearerival.com as well. Thanks for listening.
Yeah. And, even as someone who runs marketing, technology, and mostly services business, I think the default, if I was CMO, the default would be to try to build an in-house team. The thing is, it's not always right, even if it is the default. Then you need to work backwards to the reality. But I think one of the things that I'd take away from what you said is that it's not necessarily, you might have a default position, but it's not necessarily about it has to be one or the other, because you need to leave room to react to the talent that you come across. If it had been a perfect fit with that first agency or another agency that you found, maybe you keep using them. But like you said, you also had great people internally, and so you decided to kind of follow the talent. And I think that that's always the case, is like you need a plan. But at the end of the day, any business, marketing services, building and selling cars, it comes down to the talent that you have around you. So you need to leave room in how you're thinking about anything, but certainly this topic, to react to great talent or the lack of great talent when you find it. So then can you give us kind of an overview of what you talked a little bit, but maybe the quick overview of like what capabilities are in-house right now? How big are the teams to the extent that you can share? Is there anything done externally? What does it look like now in terms of the setup?
Yeah, so the creative concepts and is all run from inside, and then we of course use production companies and so forth for because it's good to get external perspectives, and I think to have only in-house for some areas is also you might lose a bit of the external influence. So for our media part, for instance, when it's good to get, even though we work closely with Google, Meta, and the other platforms, it's good to get some external perspectives. On the creative side, again, the concepts and the campaign project leads and photographer, things like that. Also our social channels we run from here, and the retail environment. So I think we're quite 360, if you will, in what we cover, which is, again, also where we see a lot of synergies. So if we do a Polestar 4 campaign, say we launch the car, it starts with our brand team putting a concept in place on how to launch it. We work with our colleagues within PR and communication and event team on how to execute on that. And of course the car programs. But then we do also in collaboration with our markets to get input. But the briefing is done here, briefing the own in-house creative teams. We have our own photographers and who do some of the launch communication assets, but also then the full presentation of the cars, the assets for .com, the assets for retail, and the campaigns and advertising in the end through the full funnel. So that makes it very consistent and efficient as well. You can make sure you get the same message and tonality out in all channels.
And so what are I'd love to just go through, we've of course talked about some already, but the benefits that you reap from having these capabilities in-house, and then maybe what some of the challenges are. For example, is finding talent harder, especially being in Gothenburg. So the benefits, again, I think we've talked about some of them, the testing, the loop with the data. Is there anything else that people maybe might not be thinking of that's a real benefit of doing this in-house? And then what have been the big challenges?
I think the consistency is key. I think that's one of the things. And again, being a very design-driven company, we're very nerdy in how we execute our communication. We have, it's very timeless, it's very design-driven and minimalistic Scandinavian design. So I think that comes from some of the people who actually been here from the very beginning when we founded the company. So that's the benefits. And I think talent has been, with that purpose of a brand, it's been quite easy. I shouldn't say easy, but we don't struggle to find talents so far, at least. It's been, and I think it has to do with the brand because it's a brand that you really want to go to work with. We have a purpose in our hallway, and we sometimes say, yeah, who don't want to work with this company? We're very design-driven, strong sustainability agenda, and so forth. So far, we've been very lucky, and we have fantastic talents.
Can I just jump in real quick? Is employer brand something that's under your remit, and is that something that you kind of have intentionally designed and developed?
No, it's not. I think we're a young company. We're not, we don't maybe have a dedicated person for that, but we work very close with HR and other functions. But again, we're a small company, so not all
Makes
functions.
sense. Yeah, because I think that's the challenge that comes to mind first for me. Building an in-house team is like, can you get the same talent that you could at an agency? But I guess there's really, at bigger companies, to your point, an employer brand and internal comms might be its own team discipline workflow. But actually, for the stage that you're at, it's really just about the clarity, the consistency, the purity of what the brand is overall, which is going to reach and influence potential talent for your in-house team in the same way that it would potential customers.
Yeah, and I think it's such a small team and such a tight team, and you're so close to what you're delivering. So I think it's also for a creative person, you immediately you have such a big responsibility compared to maybe when you're at an agency or in a bigger company that you wouldn't really feel full ownership, I can imagine. But I think that's the thing. We have talents that can see the results of what they do very quickly.
So, chapter 3 of our conversation, AI. Obviously, so many conversations, very hot topic. We have our own strong opinion, strongly held, about the state and future of AI in the marketing world as rival. But in our prep call, you said that you're seeing lots of benefits of using AI. So I'd love to hear what they are. And maybe to the extent you can share some of the specific kind of tools that you've found to be helpful and effective for your team so far.
Yeah, so we have started in small steps. We had some passionate people for the topic that gathered, where do we see we can have needs and so forth. And we work closely also with our IT and digital department, so we make sure it's brand safe and all of that. So but But to start with, we have, since we do everything centrally, we have 27 markets. It was quite natural for us to start with translation. It's quite costly, and how do you find the tonality, and so forth. So we did some tests and in some markets, and we quickly saw that some of the first results was that it was actually better hitting the tonality of the brand with the AI. So that we get some confidence, and we roll it out further, and took some further steps. So we and also in different parts of Polestar, I should say, there are other AI initiatives, but within my area, that's the one we started with. The CRM team has been in the forefront, actually. They do their brief for letters and so forth, for newsletters. They use AI. And also the creative team have started to do storyboarding, things like that, with using AI. So, and some of the testing, as I mentioned earlier. So there are a lot of areas where we feel that this can add a lot of value for us.
Is there any framework or playbook or anything about how you're leading your team and your business into this world of AI that you could maybe share with people listening? Because I think what I hear a lot of is, obviously, with any new technology, right? I mean, I guess that's probably the biggest thing for me, is like history repeats itself. We always go through the same cycles. And so it's really helpful to, one, either think back to the last one that you were in, or go study your history of like who won and who lost and how they did it. But I think the playing field is very uneven, as it always is with new technology. There's early adopters, there's people that are running with it, there's some people that are dipping a toe in the water, there's a lot of people that are standing on the sidelines. But I think everybody listening, and most of the people in the marketing world that I talk to, are just looking to learn where and how it's working for other people, the specific tools and resources. But I actually think the thing that's more helpful for people is if there's kind of a set of principles or a way that people are thinking about as a CMO, as a marketing leader, exploring these kind of uncharted waters of AI. So I guess it's hard to kind of tee up a specific question. And I know I asked you before, like specifically, what are you using and where are you applying it? But is there anything kind of more at like the mindset or principle level of how you're thinking about this for yourself and your team and your brand?
But I think for us, it's come quite natural for two different reasons. One of them being that we're a very small team. We have even done some reductions over the years. And I think the whole use of AI came from some of the team who felt that, we have so much more to deliver. And AI can be the tool that help us put more added value into it, but reduce some of the unnecessary work. So I think that was one of the drivers. And on the other hand, it's also for our talents in the company who wants to develop. I think they all see that if I'm not in a company who provides this opportunity, then I might look elsewhere. So I think it's also they see that we invest in it, and they see the benefit of that. So it's also a bit linked to employee development, if you will.
Hey everyone, I wanted to quickly jump in and ask a question that I'm sure all of you have thought of. What does the future of the CMO role actually look like? Is it evolving? Is it going extinct, like a lot of businesses seem to think it is? We have put out our very first documentary as Rival, titled The Future of the CMO. You can check it out via the link in the show notes below. We have interviewed some of the biggest and brightest minds in the marketing industry to understand what the future of this role actually looks like. Would love for you to check it out. Would love to hear what you think. Link in the show notes below.
Yeah, and actually that's something that we've thought about with Rival. There's the opportunity for our business and the clients that we work with, but actually, we want to be home for exceptional talent in the marketing industry, and exceptional talent is going to want to be ahead of the curve with this stuff. So that's really interesting. And I also really like what you said, and I can see a red thread throughout this that clearly forms a big part of kind of your mental model as CMO, which is follow the talent. It sounds like part of how this has developed into a bigger piece and a strength and an advantage for Polestar and its marketing is by following the talent, people raising their hand, people saying, hey, we should look at this, we should test that. It sounds like that's part of it as well. So it's really interesting and helpful. So also, before we go to the lightning round and wrap things up, there was a hot off the press announcement that your team sent over before we hopped on. Well, I guess it was December, but it was a new update for us, which is you've taken on broader responsibilities, including some commercial responsibilities within the business. And I mentioned just before we press record, I wanted to give a little bit of space for you to talk about that for our audience, because we're releasing our research on the future of the CMO role. And a key piece of that is for CMOs in the marketing department overall to be more capable and take more control over the commercial outputs and operations of the business. And you're doing that. So I'd love for you to share how that came about, what that new remit looks like, and any advice that you have for marketers listening who want to follow a similar path where their responsibilities are not just marketing or promotional, let's say, but also commercial, and having that folding into the marketing discipline.
Yeah, and I think for me, this comes very natural. I think that the link between the business and the marketing is sort of my driver from going in from the very beginning. I think that's marketing and sales. Everyone knows they need to work really close together. But again, in this business, you also see the immediate effect. So what I've taken on now is also a commercial operations and commercial strategy role. So working with some of the commercial strategy, so we know where we're going with the business, new markets, where can we expand, where are the potentials, to clearly identify that, and then put projects in place. So we initiated a PMO office also for that. We've had it within our brand marketing team to run projects in an efficient way, and we have that now also for the commercial part. And then it also includes sales planning and so forth. So it's again to be really, really close to the business and to the markets and serve their needs in times like this, especially, is important. So for me, it's very natural, and I think it probably goes back and forth, and it suits different companies, different how you want to set it up. But for us, this has been a good step, I think.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. And actually that, my previous role before starting Rival, I started as chief marketing officer and ended up as chief commercial officer. So oversaw marketing and sales for a similar reason, although a very different type and scale of business. And congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
So to round things out, I've got 4 quick lightning round questions for you, starting with, what was the first marketing job you ever had?
First at Volvo Cars, since I've served there long, I was in the car programs, and I more and more turned to the commercial and the marketing part of business. So it was for one of the car programs I worked with marketing.
What's the best piece of career advice you've ever received?
Oh, I have probably received a lot of advices, and it's tricky to pick one. But again, I think it's being close to the business is, you need to stay true to that and be loyal to that task rather than drive your own personal interest, probably. I don't know if that was an advice or if that was my own interpretation and summarizing it all, but true to the task.
Kind of synthesizing a lot of the advice that you've received over the years. But I was going to say, it's going to solve a lot of problems for somebody as a marketer if you can do that. And it's also going to cause a lot of problems if you can't. So I think that's a really, really important thing that I'm definitely going to take away from this conversation. Next, what is the best brand campaign you've seen recently?
Can I say our own?
You can, but then you have to give another one.
Okay. We just launched a very nice brand film linked to our strategy day that we had the other day, which I think is summarizing our journey and who we are as a brand in a really nice way. So, but I think I stick to mentioning that one. I think that's the best one.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. We'll let you off the hook this time.
Yeah.
And last question. So what is one thing people should do differently after listening to this episode?
Well, that's rather easy. I think everyone should explore our cars, book a test drive, go to our spaces, and experience our fantastic Polestar cars. I think that would be a good next step.
All right. Åsa, thank you so much for your time, and looking forward to watching the growth of Polestar over the next couple of years. Great to have you on.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Scratch is a production of Rival. We are a growth consultancy that builds challenger brands, strategies, and capabilities to disrupt categories. If you want to learn more about us, check out wearerival.com. If you want to connect with me, email me at eric@wearerival.com or find me on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe, share with anyone you think might enjoy it, and leave us a review. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.